I am 89 years old, and I want to tell you something that took me until I was 85 to understand. Not because I was slow, not because I was stupid, but because I had given up. I had genuinely, completely, without any drama or resistance, given up on the idea that my body still had anything left to offer me. I thought that was wisdom. I thought that was the mature acceptance of a man who had lived long enough to stop lying to himself. I was wrong. I was more wrong about that than I have been about almost anything in my entire life. And I have been wrong about a great many things. But that particular surrender, that quiet, dignified, a thoroughly reasonable decision to stop expecting anything from the years I had left, that was the most expensive mistake I made in the final chapter of my life. And I almost didn't get the chance to find out how wrong I was. My name is Harold. I am 89 years old. I was born in 1936 in a small town in rural Tennessee where the food was simple. The portions were enormous, but nobody talked about what anything did to your body because your body was just the thing you lived inside of and you didn't question it any more than you questioned the walls of your house. You fed it, you worked it, you slept in it, and when it started to break down, you accepted that as the natural order of things. I carried that understanding with me for 8.5 decades. It cost me more than I can fully calculate sitting here now, and looking back at the wreckage of what I thought was just a normal life. I want to tell you about the 4 years before I visited my cousin brother Edmund at his monastery in the mountains of New Mexico. Because those 4 years from when I turned 81 to when I finally made that trip at 85 were the most resigned, the most colorless, the most quietly desperate years of my life. And I need you to understand what resignation actually feels like from the inside, because it doesn't feel like sadness. It doesn't feel like despair. It feels like clarity. It feels like you have finally stopped being foolish enough to want things, and there is a terrible peace in that. There is a warmth in giving up that I did not expect, and it is the most dangerous warmth I've ever felt. My wife Eleanor had died in 2018 of 53 years of marriage, and then one morning she was there, and by the afternoon she was not. A stroke. She was 79. I was 82. My son David lives in Portland and calls me every Sunday, and those calls are the most important 20 minutes of my week, which is a fact that tells you something about what my weeks had become. My daughter Patricia lives 40 minutes away and visits when she can, which is not often enough. But I do not say that as a criticism because she has her own life and I am proud of her for having it. I had my chair, I had my television, I had my kitchen where I ate the same 6 or 7 things in rotation because cooking for one person felt like an absurdity I had not yet learned to forgive myself for. I was eating badly. I knew I was eating badly, but at 81, 82, 83, I had arrived at a conclusion that felt completely rational. It did not matter anymore. The damage was done. The decades of white bread and canned soup and too much salt and too much sugar, and the 31 years I spent eating lunch every single day at my desk from a paper bag because I was too busy to sit down. All of that was already written into my body, and the ledger was closed. I had high blood pressure that had been controlled by medication since I was 64. I had arthritis in both knees that made the stairs inside my own house feel like a negotiation. I had a lower back that had been quietly complaining since 1987 and had graduated to open protest sometime around 2015. My energy was what it was. My digestion was unreliable. My sleep was shallow and interrupted. I woke up most mornings at 4:30 or 5. Not because I chose to, but because my body had apparently decided that 6 hours was a luxury it could no longer afford. And I accepted all of this. I accepted it completely. If you are still here with me, still listening to an old man describe the slow geography of his own decay, I want to ask you something before I go any further. Subscribe to this channel, not because numbers matter to me at this point in my life, Matt, but because what I am about to tell you changed the last 4 years of my life in ways I did not think were possible. And there is someone in your life, I am almost certain of it, who needs to hear this before they make the same surrender I made. Subscribe, and this reaches them. That is the only reason I am asking. I want to tell you what 83 felt like from the inside. because I think people on the outside imagine old age as a single condition rather than a series of specific losses. Each loss arrives separately. Each one has its own texture, its own particular humiliation. At 83, I noticed that I was sitting down to put my shoes on. I had always stood. I had put my shoes on standing up for my entire life, the way my father had, and the way a man does when he has not yet surrendered his balance to the years. And one morning I sat down without thinking, without choosing to, and I realized afterward what I had done. And I sat there for a moment looking at my shoes, and I thought, so that is where we are now. That is the new geography. You sit down to put your shoes on now, Harold, and you file that under the heading of normal, and you move on. At 83, I was also eating, on a typical day, the following: a bowl of instant oatmeal with 3 spoons of brown sugar and a cup of black coffee for breakfast, 2 slices of white bread with processed ham, and a smear of mayonnaise for lunch. Usually eaten standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down at the table alone felt worse than standing for dinner. Something from a can or something frozen, heated in the microwave, eaten in my chair in front of the news. I drank perhaps 4 glasses of water a day. I ate fruit maybe twice a week. Vegetables appeared on my plate when Patricia brought them, which was perhaps once or twice a month. I had not eaten a proper meal I want to be honest here, I had not sat down to a real made from an ingredients meal since Eleanor died 5 years. 5 years of this. And I thought nothing of it because I had stopped expecting my food to do anything for me beyond satisfying the basic mechanical demand of hunger. If any of this is landing somewhere real in you, if you recognize this resignation, either in yourself or in someone you love, I want you to press the like button, because I know I am not the only one who has felt this particular piece of giving up. I know there are people watching this right now who understand exactly what I am describing, and knowing that someone out there heard this, that it mattered enough to press that button that means something to me. It tells me I am not just an old man talking to himself. In March of 2021, my son David called on a Sunday, which was not unusual, but in that call he mentioned something about my cousin Edmund. Edmund was my father's brother's son, 8 years younger than me, which made him 77 at the time. We had grown up together in Tennessee, and Edmund had taken a path that no one in our family had anticipated at the age of 34. After a career in civil engineering, he had entered a Benedictine monastery in the mountains outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I had not seen Edmund in 11 years. We exchanged letters twice a year, which at the age of email felt like a private ceremony between 2 old men who still believed that handwriting meant something. David mentioned that Edmund had written to him. Edmund had written to say that he was concerned about me, that the letters I had been sending for the past 2 years had a tone to them that worried him. Edmund wrote, and David read this to me over the phone: Harold has stopped asking questions. His letters describe, but they do not wonder. I think he has decided that his life is finished while he is still in it. I sat with that for a long time after David hung up. 3 days, to be exact. I sat with it for 3 days, and on the 4th day I called David back and told him I wanted to visit Edmund at the monastery. I drove to New Mexico in May of 2021, 14 hours over 2 days. I stopped at a motel in Amarillo and ate a terrible meal alone, in a restaurant where the food tasted like salt and regret, and I thought about turning back at least 4 times. I arrived at the monastery on a Tuesday afternoon, and Edmund met me at the gate, and he looked, I want to be precise about this, he looked 20 years younger than I expected. He was 77 years old, and he moved like a man in his late 50s. His face had the particular quality of skin that has been well cared for. He was thin, but not fragile thin. There was a density to him, a rootedness. His grip when he shook my hand was firm, in a way mine had not been in years. I stayed for 11 days. I had intended to stay for 5. What happened in those 11 days is the reason I am talking to you now. The monastery had a garden, a large, serious garden, tended by 7 of the brothers, that produced most of the food the community ate. On my second morning, Edmund took me through it before breakfast, and he named things as we walked, the varieties of greens they grew, the specific herbs and what each one was used for, the dried beans stored in the cellar that they ate through winter. He talked about food the way I had never heard anyone talk about food in 85 years of living. Not as fuel, not as pleasure, exactly, as information, as communication between the body and the earth it came from. He said something I have thought about almost every day since. Harold, every meal is either a message of care or a message of neglect. Your body reads every single one. It keeps records you don't see. I want to pause here and say something directly to whoever is watching this. There are people you love who are sending their body the wrong message every single day, and they do not know it, and no one has told them clearly enough. Subscribe to this channel and share these conversations. Don't let this kind of knowledge stay here. It belongs to your father, your mother, your spouse. Whoever in your life is eating from cans in front of the television because they have decided it doesn't matter anymore. It matters. I am the proof that it matters, and I need that proof to travel further than this screen. Let me tell you the 6 things Edmund taught me. Not as rules, not as a regimen, as conversations we had over 11 days. Walking in the garden, eating meals together in the refectory with the other brothers, sitting in the evenings on a low stone wall, watching the light change over the mountains. The first lesson was about walnuts. Edmund put a small handful on my plate at breakfast on the 3rd morning and said simply, "Eat these every day." I asked why. He said the fats in walnuts were the specific type of fat that the brain and the heart required to function at their best in old age. Not just any fat, this particular fat found in walnuts, and in almost nothing else in the quantity that mattered. He told me he had been eating a small handful of walnuts every morning for 30 years. He told me that the brothers who maintained the sharpest minds into their 80s and 90s were, but without exception, the ones who ate walnuts regularly. I did not take this as science. I took it as testimony from a man whose mind and body I could see with my own eyes. I started eating walnuts the next morning, and I have not stopped in 4 years. The second lesson was about olive oil. Edmund cooked almost everything in olive oil, and he used it generously. Not a thin film in the pan, but a real pour, enough that you could smell it heating. He told me that his predecessor, an older brother who had died at 94, still working in the garden, had believed that the single most important thing he did for his body was eat olive oil every day. Not in capsules, not as a supplement, as food drizzled over bread, used in cooking, sometimes taken by the spoon in the morning, as the brothers had done for generations. I thought about the vegetable oil I had been cooking with at home, the same jug of it I had been buying for 30 years without once asking whether it was doing me good or harm. I had never asked that question. The oil was just the oil. It cooked the food. That was the end of its job description in my mind. I came home from New Mexico and threw out the vegetable oil, and I have not bought it since. The third lesson came on the 6th day, when Edmund made soup for dinner. A deep and dark soup made from dried lentils and onion and garlic and fresh rosemary from the garden. I ate 2 bowls. I had not eaten 2 bowls of anything in years. And he told me, without any drama, just as conversation, that lentils were perhaps the most underestimated food in existence for men our age. That the combination of protein, fiber, for man, and specific minerals in a cup of lentils did things for the body's inflammation that most medications tried and failed to replicate. He said the brothers who can still walk without pain at 85 are the brothers who have eaten legumes regularly for 40 years. I thought about my knees. I thought about the stairs in my house. I thought about the 11 years since I had eaten lentils, which was the last time Eleanor had made her mother's lentil soup, and I had complained, gently, that it wasn't what I felt like that night. She never made it again. I did not deserve that memory, but I kept it. The 4th lesson was about garlic, raw garlic, specifically, which Edmund ate every single day in quantities that seemed excessive to me at first. He crushed a clove into olive oil and used it as a condiment with breakfast, with lunch, with dinner. He told me it was the single most powerful thing he knew of for blood pressure and for the arteries. He told me that he had stopped taking the blood pressure medication prescribed to him at 58, at 61 years old, by changing his diet, and that garlic had been central to that change. I had been on blood pressure medication since I was 64. I do not tell you this as advice to stop your medication. I tell you this as the thing Edmund said to me that made me look at my own pill organizer differently, not with resentment, but with a question I had never thought to ask. What would happen if the food I ate was part of the treatment instead of separate from it? I want to stop here just for a moment and talk to you directly. Not as Harold, the narrator of this story, but as an 89-year-old man who knows he is running out of time in the most literal sense. If something I have said today, any of it has shifted something in you. If you are going to eat differently tomorrow because of what you heard here, give this video a like. That is how I know. That is the only way I have of knowing whether these words are reaching anyone. Whether Edmund's lessons are traveling beyond this room, you would be giving an old man something that matters to him in the time he has left. The fifth lesson was about greens. Dark leafy greens. Specifically the ones Edmund grew in the garden that I would not have recognized in a grocery store. Different varieties of kale, deep purple lettuces, a particular type of Swiss chard, with stems the color of sunset. He told me that the brothers ate some form of these greens every single day, at every single meal, and that the magnesium and the specific compounds in dark leafy greens were what kept the mind clear, and the inflammation low in the bones from becoming the fragile, porous, dangerous scaffolding that they became in men who lived on processed food and white bread. I thought of the last time I had eaten dark leafy greens with intention, not as decoration on a plate, but as the point of the meal. I could not remember. Somewhere in my 60s, I thought. Maybe earlier. Decades of absence that my body had registered the way Edmund said it registered everything. Quietly, patiently, keeping its records. The sixth lesson was the one that changed me most. It was not about a specific food. It was about water. Edmund drank water constantly. Not dramatically. Not with ceremony. Just steadily. Throughout the day, the way some people breathe. Continuously, without having to think about it. He drank water with lemon first thing in the morning. He drank water between meals. He drank water after prayer. He carried a small ceramic cup with him everywhere in the monastery and refilled it at the stone basin near the kitchen. He told me that by the time most men my age were reaching for food, they were actually thirsty, but that the hunger signal and the thirst signal became increasingly difficult to distinguish in old age, and that most of what he called the fog of old age, the fatigue, the difficulty thinking, the lower-level headache that became so normal you forgot it was there, was dehydration that had been building for years. Decades, a whole lifetime of men who drank coffee and ignored water. I thought about my 4 glasses of water a day. I thought about the 31 years I spent at my desk drinking coffee and diet soda and barely any water at all. Finishing every workday slightly dehydrated and never knowing it because the feeling had become my baseline. I thought about Eleanor, who had always kept a glass of water on the nightstand and drunk from it through the night, and how I had teased her about it gently, as one teases someone for a habit one doesn't share. She outlived her predicted lifespan by 11 years. She had no chronic inflammation. Her mind stayed sharp until the very end. The stroke that took her was not the result of a body poorly maintained. It was the random cruelty of a blood vessel that failed without warning. Her body, unlike mine, had been treated with care for 79 years. I drove home from New Mexico in late May of 2021, but I stopped at a grocery store in Albuquerque before I got on the interstate, and I bought walnuts and lentils and olive oil and 3 different kinds of dark leafy greens and a head of garlic and 2 lemons. I drove 14 hours over 2 days, and I ate food I had prepared myself, real food. And I arrived home and I cooked dinner in my kitchen for the first time in 3 years. When I sat down at the table, not at my chair in front of the television, at the table where Eleanor and I had eaten 10,000 meals together, and I ate alone, and it was the loneliest meal I can remember, and it was also the best meal I had eaten in years, and those 2 things were not in contradiction. That was 4 years ago. I am 89 now. Let me tell you what is different. My blood pressure has come down enough that my doctor, at my last appointment 8 months ago, reduced my medication for the first time in 25 years. Not eliminated, reduced. He asked me what I had changed. I told him. He wrote it down. My knees still hurt, but less measurably, noticeably less. And I no longer sit down to put my shoes on. I caught myself standing last Tuesday, shoes on, and I stood there for a moment just noting it, the way you note an old friend you thought you'd lost. My sleep is longer and less fractured. I wake at 5:30 most mornings instead of 4:30, which sounds like a small thing but is not small. It is 1 full hour of rest that I had written off as gone. My mind is clearer. I read again real books, not just the newspaper, for the first time since Eleanor died. I finished 3 books in the last 2 months. I called David last Sunday and he said, "Dad, you sound different." I told him I was different. He got quiet in a way that told me he was trying not to cry, and I let him have that. I used to eat instant oatmeal with 3 spoons of sugar. Now I eat oats with walnuts and a drizzle of olive oil and a handful of whatever greens I have. Which sounds strange, and is not strange at all, once you have done it for a week. I used to drink 4 glasses of water a day. Now I drink 12. I keep a glass on the kitchen counter and 1 on the nightstand. Eleanor's old spot, and I drink from it through the night. And every time I do, I feel something that is not quite forgiveness and not quite gratitude, but somewhere between the two. I eat lentil soup twice a week. I use olive oil for everything. I eat raw garlic every day, and my son jokes that I have become a new kind of old man. An old man who smells like a kitchen and looks better than he has in 15 years. Now let me tell you about the 3 things I would undo if I could go back with what I know now. I would have stopped treating food as logistics in my 40s. I was 44 years old and working 60-hour weeks and eating from the paper bag at my desk because food was fuel and nothing more. A problem to be solved quickly so I could return to the real work. I ate that way for 22 years, from my early 40s to my mid-60s, 22 years of telling my body that it was not worth slowing down for. My body registered every one of those messages. When I finally slowed down in retirement, the bill had already been calculated. I would have started drinking water properly at 50. At 50, I was still healthy enough that changes would have rewritten the next 3 decades. Instead, I kept drinking coffee all morning and diet soda in the afternoon, and perhaps a glass of water at dinner if Eleanor put it in front of me. I was chronically, mildly dehydrated for 30 years, and I called it tiredness, and attributed it to work and age and everything except the obvious cause. If you are 50 years old and watching this, I am asking you directly, how much water did you drink today? Not coffee, not soda, water. I would have visited Edmund at 45. I would have listened to what he was already living then. At 30, a man who had chosen to organize his life around the intelligence of his body rather than the demands of productivity. I would have sat in that garden 20 years earlier. I would have eaten the lentil soup and the walnuts and drizzled the olive oil and understood, at an age when the body still had most of its decades ahead of it, what kind of messages I wanted to send. I did not do any of this. I waited until I was 85 and had already surrendered. But the lesson was still there when I arrived, and it was still true, and it was still powerful enough to give me 4 years that I had written off as empty. My legs are not what they were at 50. They will never be what they were at 50. But they carried me through the garden at the monastery, and they carried me down the stairs in my house every morning. And last month, they carried me on a walk of 45 minutes through the neighborhood that I completed without stopping. I am 89 years old. I walked 45 minutes without stopping. I have not done that in 8 years. Here is what I want to leave you with. The resignation I felt at 81 was not wisdom. It was not acceptance. It was surrender dressed in the clothes of maturity. And it was costing me years that still had something in them. The body does not give up when you give up on it. It is still there, still working, still capable of responding to kindness. Edmund is 81 now. He walks 2 miles every morning before breakfast. He tends the garden. He writes letters in handwriting that is still clear and considered. He will probably outlive me by a decade, but that is not a sentence I say with bitterness. It is a sentence I say with something closer to awe. Because I watched what he built over 50 years, and I understand now that it was not accident or genetics. It was accumulated decision. thousands of quiet decisions made over decades to send his body a message of care instead of neglect. I have maybe 3 or 4 years left, perhaps more if the pattern of the last 4 continues. I do not know, but I know that the years I have are better than the years I had written off, and that the difference came from 11 days in a monastery in New Mexico and a cousin who noticed that I had stopped asking questions. I am asking questions again. I asked my doctor 3 last week. That surprised him. I asked Edmund in my last letter what he had been reading, and his response was 12 pages, handwritten. But I read every word, and I am going to read it again. My body is not my enemy. It was never my enemy. It was trying to tell me something for 40 years, and I was too busy, and then too resigned to listen. I am listening now. It is not too late to listen. Even at 89, it is not too late. Even at whatever age you are, sitting wherever you are sitting right now, it is not too late to change one thing. Just one. Start with water, but start with walnuts. Start with olive oil instead of whatever you've been using for 30 years without asking what it does. Start with something. Edmund told me on my last morning at the monastery that the Benedictine tradition has a concept for what I was experiencing. He did not use the Latin because he said I would just make fun of him. He said simply, "It is never too late to begin. That is the rule. Not begin again, because again implies you already knew the right way and stopped. Just begin, as if for the first time." With the curiosity and the openness of someone who does not yet know what is possible. I was 85 years old and I was beginning. I am 89 and I am still beginning. My legs are tired. My back is telling me it has said enough for one sitting. But before I go, I want to say this one last time, clearly, without ceremony. You are not too old. You have not gone too far. The body you are living in right now is waiting for a message of care, and it will respond to that message in ways that will surprise you, because the body is far more patient and far more forgiving than we deserve. Give it the walnuts. Give it the water. Give it the olive oil and the lentils and the dark greens and the garlic. Give it one thing today that tells it you have not given up. That is all it is asking for. That is all it has ever been asking for. I am tired now. Go. Don't wait like I did.